Welcome everybody to tonight's first webinar. We had a few bugs to work out with some AV equipment, and this evening's program is going to be kicked off by Dr. Darrh Bullock. He's going to share with you a little bit on reaching out while locked in, bull buying while maintaining social distancing.
Appreciate everybody joining us tonight. This is, I know we're all in times that none of us are very familiar with. And so this is a new kind of concept we came up with. Since we can't make it out into the counties right now, we thought we would do this series for you. And I'll put up at the very end the future programs, sessions, but I think everybody should know that's on here. You've probably seen it multiple times now, and we do appreciate you coming. I'm going to start off tonight just a little bit on the light side of things. I'm glad Dr. Anderson's on here. I think everybody knows that Dr. Anderson is our repro guy. He's the one that's out there doing a lot of palpating, both pregnancy checking and AI and things like that. And if you've never seen Les in person, he'll have a nice picture of himself, I guess, next week when he talks. But he's a big guy with big forearms and all. So many of you probably wonder what Les does when his arm gets tired. And so I'm going to show you that tonight. There's Dr. Anderson doing some inseminating the old-fashioned way.
Hey, don't make fun of me now.
Sorry, I know you can take it. I wouldn't pick on Jeff. He can't take it. All right. We're going to go through some basic genetics. A good bit of what I plan to talk with you guys about tonight is not necessarily a whole lot different than we've discussed in the past, with a little bit at the end focused towards the times that we're in right now. But anyway, just to get into it, everybody I think probably understands the basic concept that any trait we deal with has both a genetic component to it and an environmental component. So let's take a trait. Since I picked on Les, I'll bring up his favorite topic. Let's look at a trait like reproduction, percent pregnancy rate, or anything like that that has to do with reproduction. I think that most of us understand that there is that genetic component that we have, and that's what we'll kind of focus on tonight. And there's an environmental component. Now we can break that down a little bit further, and this is probably a more descriptive breakdown of what's involved when we think about any trait, and reproduction once again is our example here right now. So when we think about reproduction, we have additive genetics, and these are the genetics that in a simplistic way, they act the way we would expect them to. So if you have a dominant and a recessive allele, the dominant has a higher value, the recessive a lower value, and then when you get the heterozygote, it falls right in the middle. And so genes like that, or gene action like that, is something we can predict. And so that's what we call the additive genetics. And when we make selection decisions, that's what we're trying to improve. We're trying to improve the additive genetics of our herd. We also have the non-additive genetic effects, and these are the ones that are less predictable. It's traits like dominance, because when we have complete dominance, we don't know if it's whether it's a homozygous dominant or if it's a heterozygote, because they act exactly the same way. So it's much harder to predict what goes on with non-additive genetics. And actually, the way, though, from a breeding management, the way we take advantage of that, though, is through crossbreeding. When we crossbreed, the heterosis that we get is actually improving the non-additive genetic component of that big equation. The environment, I think everybody knows that's going to also play a role. And so for reproduction, I've put a few different ones down there. The weather, of course, is the most common one that we think of from a environment standpoint. Grazing. How good the pasture is certainly going to impact. If we have a drought or something like that, that's may negatively impact, say, reproduction. Feed availability, once again, if it's a drought and they don't have enough grazing, are you willing to give them feed or not? And that's going to certainly impact that. Health can impact whether or not the reproduction, and our health program is certainly a big part of that environmental component. And one that I know you're all going to say, well, that's a genetic component, and certainly the bull is bringing genetics to the table. But let's think about a trait like reproduction. If that bull has not passed his breeding soundness exam and happens not to be fertile, uh, then that's an environmental impact on that trait of reproduction, because it wasn't that cow's fault. It wasn't her additive or non-additive genetics that caused her not to get pregnant. It was the fact that the bull was not viable. And last that we're going to talk about that doesn't get as much attention is that genetic by environmental interaction. And that's what we mean by matching our genetics to our environment. And so I'm not going to diminish the impacts or the importance of these traits that are in red. We're just not going to talk about those tonight. I'll let these other guys talk about those at some other time. We're going to cover the components that are in green. So when we think about breeding management, as I just showed you, the two ways that we handle breeding management is through crossbreeding and selection. That's how we impact our herds. We'll get into those in more detail. Now, from a selection standpoint, the two that we are the way that we have the biggest impact on our herd from a genetic standpoint, those additive genetics, are in the bulls that we purchase. And that can be AI too. If you're buying straws of semen, it's the same concept. But that sire component is how we make our biggest change, because if you think about it, the sire contributes half the genetics for the entire herd. Each cow contributes the genetics for half of a calf each year. So that's why it has much more importance than, say, cow culling. The other thing about cow culling, and the reason it doesn't have a huge impact, is as most of you know, the number one reason for culling a cow is because she's open. And I'm going to show you a little bit, due to heritability, that reproduction is a lowly heritable trait, which means that those additive genetics aren't playing a huge role in the reproduction of a cow. So if she's open, it's probably due to management or the environment in some way. And so we're not really, when we cull cows, it's usually the right economic thing to do, but it's really not making a big impact on the genetics of our herd. And then the replacements, whether you, particularly if you keep back your own replacements, what's going to play a huge role there, of course, is back up here to the bull purchasing part. So if you're keeping back your own replacements, then that makes that bull purchasing decision an even more important decision at that time. So let's focus on crossbreeding. Why do we crossbreed? Well, the two big reasons that you always hear is heterosis and breed complementarity. Breed complementarity, in my opinion, has much less value today than it did at one time. At one time, our breeds were very different. We had some breeds that I would consider were moderate in size, moderate in maternal abilities, and just made pretty good mama cows for most situations. Our Angus, our Hereford, our British breeds kind of fell nicely into that category. They also, from a breed complementarity standpoint, brought about some positive things from the end product standpoint in terms of quality grade. And then our continental breeds were the breeds that brought more growth to the table, and also more leanness from a carcass cutability standpoint. And so we had a pretty good maternal paternal setup. But if you look at genetic trends for the breeds today, most of the breeds are coming together. And whereas we had a lot of variation between the breeds at one point in time, the breeds are much more similar today than they were historically. And so it's hard for us to get, I think, the same benefits from breed complementarity as we used to, but we still need to think about things like when we do breed selection, if we don't have a situation where we have a lot of nutrients, then we probably want to avoid some breeds that say are going to have a tremendous amount of growth in milk. So heterosis. The definition of heterosis is the advantage that a crossbred has over the average of the breeds represented in the cross. Okay, very important definition, and I don't want you to have the false impression that that means that a crossbred is going to be better for an individual trait than either of the two breeds represented in the cross, because that might not be the case. For an individual trait, one of the breeds may be better than even the crossbred for that trait. But when we look at the cumulative effect of all the traits combined, that's when we see the real advantage to crossbreeding, because for another trait, the breed that was inferior for the first trait might be superior even to the crossbred. But when we add all those individual components together and look at the cumulative effect, crossbreeding has some real advantages for us. This shows you kind of the just breaking the traits out into some categories. Reproduction has a very high impact from heterosis, as well as longevity. Those are two really economically important traits for us. How long we keep a cow productive in the herd, and the reproduction rate each year. Those are the traits that kind of pay the bills. And so the fact that heterosis has a very high impact on those traits it should tell you why we place as much emphasis on it as we do. For other traits like production and health, those are moderately impacted by crossbreeding. So we still get some definite benefits for those traits. It's just not as great as, say, reproduction or longevity. And the group of traits that probably has the least impact is the end product. And so when we look at how they hang on the rail, the straight bred and the crossbred, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two. So the ag econ guys and I developed a crossbreeding to look at the economic impact of crossbreeding. And many of you have seen this before, but I'm going to show the results in a little different way than I typically have in the past. What I've done is we still are wanting to look at a typical kind of a situation, and I'm going to use a two bull unit kind of a herd. So about 50 head of cattle that are in the herd. We're going to say the weaning rate, R, that's with an R, is 85%. So 85%, we weaned 85% of the calves from the cows that we exposed to the bull originally. Okay. So we also have the standard of 5 1/4 on the weaning weight, and these are just inputs that we put into this, okay? And so you can get, you could have plugged in different values, but these are kind of some standard values we used, and we went with a $1.50 a pound on the price of those feeder calves, okay? So when you look at it that way and we compare some different crossbreeding systems, you can see, of course, if you're straight breeding, you get no heterosis and therefore no value to heterosis. If you have what we call just a simple two breed bull rotation, and that's you choose two breeds, let's say Angus and Simmental, and you rotate between those two breeds every 4 years. So Angus for 4 years, then Simmental for 4 years, then back to Angus for 4 years. If you just keep that simple rotation up, you get about 50% of maximum. And for the scenario we set up with that 50 head herd, that would work out to over $3,500 a year that you get just from establishing that very, very simple crossbreeding system above just going with the same breed year after year after year. So it really hasn't cost you a dime, and you've increased your income by around 3,500 bucks. You can do the same thing with three breeds. So in other words, Angus, Hereford, and Simmental. And so 4 years of the first breed, then 4 years of the second breed, then 4 years of the third breed, and then back to the first breed again. And if you implement that, now you are going to get a little more variation in the way your calves turn out, but you also increase the heterosis that you get. Now you get retained heterosis of around 67%, and about $5,000 return on that investment of really $0. And so you can see the benefits there. Now, if you do a more structured crossbreeding program, and this one takes a little more effort, but let's say that your two breeds, Angus and Simmental again, what it means is if you have a female that was sired by an Angus, you would always mate that female to the Simmental. And vice versa. If you have a female that was sired by a Simmental, you would always breed that female to an Angus. If you do that kind of a structured rotation, you get that 67% retained heterosis again, so around the 5 grand added income. And it's a pretty easy system to keep up with. A simple ear tagging system where you know that a Angus sired female always has a blue tag and a Simmental sired female always has a red tag. It's pretty easy to divide up your breeding pastures and put the bull out or do your AI program or whatever. If you do that structured system, once again, but a three breed rotation, now you've increased that overall income that you get on a yearly basis on that 50 head herd to about 6,300 bucks, and that's not bad. Now, we've always heard a lot about these roto terminals, and I love a good roto terminal cross. And I think that it's been talked about enough out there, and that's where you just have, say, a 2 breed rotation to supply your replacement females, and then the rest of the females get bred to a terminal type sire and everything's sold. Your females in the herd then have about 67% heterosis, and the calves, most of the calves are going to have 100% heterosis. And you would think, well, that sounds like it's going to be better than a 3 breed structured rotation. But as you can see, it actually equates into less. And that's because it's those extra, it's the loss, a little bit of loss in heterosis that you get in your replacement females, that maternal heterosis component. And remember, now about a third of the calves that you're producing are going to have only 2/3 heterosis as opposed to the 100%. And so that's why you actually, from an actual value standpoint, the one that is the most economically feasible is that three breed type of a rotation. All right, so here's the simple kind of guidelines. If you're going to do a crossbreeding system, I would never recommend more than 3 breeds. So choose the 2 or 3 breeds and find a very simple structured rotation system, or is that simple one, like I said, of just rotating between the breeds. Keep it simple and keep up with it. Another good way to look at it is try not to ever keep back replacement heifers that have more than 75% of any one breed. If you can keep that discipline about you, and you never keep back a replacement female with more than 75% of one breed, you're going to do a pretty good job with your crossbreeding program. So once they start getting to that 75%, then of course you would want to switch over to that breed them to that is in the lower percent. That's the 25% or so. All right, moving on to some selection. Now let's get into the actual nitty gritty about actually going out and buying the bulls. Well, before you do that, I got a little bit of homework for you. And that is because to me, it's almost impossible to know what kind of bull it is you need for your operation unless you really sit back and assess what it is, what kind of a situation you're going to put those cattle in when you get them home. And this is particularly important if you're keeping back your own replacement heifers. What kind of management are you going to put those replacement heifers in? Now, as you all know, management incorporates a whole lot of different aspects, but I think the two that relate the most to bull buying are these two, and that's labor and nutrition. Now, the labor part is not traditional labor that we normally think of, about how many man hours and things like that. I want you to think about labor in this context as to how much time you actually get to spend with the females during the calving season. That's going to be the big deal, because here's the guy over here on the right. You know, a lot of people say, well, that's not the situation I want to be in. I disagree wholeheartedly, because if that cow's in trouble, which she is, that is the situation you want to be in. You don't want to be at your other job working and she's laying there straining and ends up dying. So think about labor from that standpoint of how much are you around to take care of it. Because if you're in a situation to take care of a problem if it happens, then you can give yourself a little more lenience on calving ease, which might give you a little bit more production out of the bull that you're able to buy. But if you're a part-time guy and you know you only spend very limited time with your females during the calving season, you better make sure you have a good calving ease bull to take care of the job, and maybe have to sacrifice just a little bit on the production side so that you don't get in a bad situation. From a nutrition standpoint, we have three basic categories. The first is your forage base. How good are the forages you have? And when I talk about forage base, I'm saying the type of grasses or legumes that you have. And I know everybody's got fescue and it's probably infected, but how good a legume overseeding do you have in there? Do you have good clover? Do you do some of those things? Another aspect of forage base would be, do you rotationally graze, or how intensively do you rotationally graze? Because that's going to have a big effect really on what kind of bull you should be looking at. Because if your forage base is not pretty good, then you probably don't need to be buying that top end bull at the sale, the one with all the growth and all the milk. Because if you put his daughters into a forage base that's inadequate, then what's going to happen? Those females are going to lose condition and possibly have trouble getting rebred. So from a stored feed standpoint, we're in the same situation, but actually we probably see as much or more variability in stored feeds from a hay standpoint as we do in the forage base, because it's very difficult to get hay put up appropriately. And I think the last two hay seasons have proven that to everybody, that it's pretty tough to get up good high quality hay on a consistent basis. And so that needs to factor in how you store that hay. When you get it cut, how good do you get it put up, and then how do you store it? Those are all things that are going to impact really the level of production you can expect to get out of your cows. Now, to me, that's a pretty rough looking bale of hay. And Jeff, I'm going to guess that's about a condition score 7 or 8 there. So she's not doing too bad on that hay. But if you see that she was in a condition score of, say, a 3 or a 4, then your decision is do I purchase feed and get the condition back up? And here's my assessment there. If you find that every year that you're having to pour the feed to your cows after they've had their calf and you're trying to get ready for rebreeding, then you probably don't have your genetics matched well to your forage program, and you need to tweak. Either you need to do a better job with your forages, or maybe come back down just a little bit on that level of production you're trying to get out of your cows. And so it's finding that sweet spot and that place where you can kind of maximize your efficiency that we're striving for here. I mentioned heritability. When we think about making selection decisions, heritability kind of tells us how effective we can be at it. So for traits that are lowly heritable, such as reproduction, it means that really our best tool for making changes is probably going to be there, or improvements, is through our crossbreeding program and improving our management, because the heritability or the additive genetics plays a small role there. For traits like production, milk, growth, those kind of traits, moderately impact or moderate heritable traits. And so we can make some good progress there, and certainly think that you need to be trying to make some improvements through your selection decisions there. And then the end product, which is highly heritable, those are traits that you can make a lot of progress fast. And so once again, the way you look at heritability is the higher the heritability, the better, or the faster, more rapid you can make genetic change. For things like quality grade, carcass weight, some of those more highly heritable traits, 1 generation, you can really make a quick turnaround in as little as 1 generation. So when we go to make selection decisions, you're going to have some options to look at, and one is from a production side. When you go to buy the bull, I would suspect that you're going to have the opportunity to see what that bull weighed at birth, what he weighed at weaning, what he weighed at yearling time, maybe a handful of other actual measurements. Hopefully you're going to have EPDs, and for a lot of breeds now, we have indexes out there, which is a single value that will help us to make selection decisions if that index matches our particular situation well. Then an index is a good means of making selection too. And maybe some genomics. Now, fortunately today, most of that genomics information is getting tied into the EPDs to give us higher accuracy EPDs, and that's still how I would advise you to use that information. Hopefully your seed stock provider is doing genomic testing, sending that in through the association and incorporating it into the EPDs to give us better accuracy values there. But except for one exception that I'm going to talk about later, the actual measurements are not something that we would recommend that you pay attention to, that all focus needs to be on these EPDs and indexes. That's for the production traits. Now we still have to visually appraise the bull. We have to look at them for the structure standpoint, muscling. We're still providing beef, and so we want them to have good muscling. We also need them to have good body capacity so they can consume the forages. And a trait that's extremely important to a lot of Kentucky producers is the temperament as well. We want good docile cattle so that we don't have to deal with an idiot running us up the fence or killing our kids and grandkids. So temperament is certainly a trait that's of high value here in Kentucky. Now, how an EPD works, this is for a trait like weaning weight direct, and these are two Angus bulls. The bull on the left has a weaning weight direct EPD of 65 pounds. The bull on the right is 50 pounds. Now, this does not mean that the bull on the left is going to add 65 pounds of weaning weight to your calves and the bull on the right would add 50 pounds. What it means is if we were to breed these two bulls to comparable females under comparable management, we would expect the calves produced by the bull on the left to weigh on average 15 pounds more than the calves produced by the bull on the right. Now, whether that's 615 versus 600 pounds or 515 versus 500 pounds is going to depend on the cows you put them on and the management that you put them in. So you can't predict what those weights are going to be, but we can predict pretty accurately that the bull on the left is going to give us heavier weaning weight calves. For a trait like milk, we're another generation away, right? Because the bull isn't going to milk. He's not milking at all. We've got to look at his daughters. And so for the milk trait, these two Hereford bulls, the bull on the left has a milk EPD of 25 pounds. The bull on the right has a milk EPD of 15 pounds. So if we breed these two bulls to equal females, equal management, take the daughters produced from that mating and breed them to equal bulls under equal management, we would expect the bull on the left's daughters to raise calves that weigh 10 more pounds at weaning on average than the calves raised by the bull on the right's daughters, okay? So we're talking about the grand progeny now, the differences in grand progeny when we think about a trait like milk, okay? So breaking down the different traits, as I mentioned before, if you want calving ease, if you're looking to buy a bull that is a calving ease bull, you need to look at the calving ease direct EPD, okay? If you're looking, and so what's going to determine how high a level you need for calving ease is going to be traits or be factors such as what's the ratio of heifers to cows? Are you breeding that bull to all heifers? Are you breeding him to all cows or some mix? And that's going to determine kind of the level of that calving ease direct EPD. Also, that aspect of how much time you're able to spend with them at calving could influence that as well. Now, if you want to know how easy a calver's a bull's daughters are going to be, that's the calving ease maternal trait, okay? And for that, high values means that bull's daughters should be easier calvers. That does not replace the need to buy a decent calving ease direct bull to breed to those females. It just means that they should do a little easier job of calving than daughters from a bull with lower calving ease maternal values. The growth traits, I recommend primarily selecting on the growth trait that's nearest to when you want to market the calves. Traits like the weaning weight EPD, for those of you that are selling straight off the cow, though that's probably the EPD you need to be thinking about. If you're backgrounding for any time period, even if you're talking about the 45 days for a CPH 45 sale, I kind of recommend to move up to the yearling weight EPD. Once you do, if you're going to do any kind of backgrounding whatsoever, make the yearling weight EPD the one that you select on. And then if you're retaining ownership all the way through, then the carcass weight is going to be the driver for the growth trait that you look at there. Now, you need to remember, we don't need to single trait select. If you just try to maximize growth, here are some problems. The milking ability of your future herd is likely to go down. Mature size will definitely go up, and bigger cows eat more, and your calving ease is very likely to go down as well. And so be careful and don't get into a single trait selection for high growth and get yourself in trouble in other areas. Pay attention to what's going on in the other traits as well. Some maternal traits, milk is one, and we've already kind of gone through how milk works, but some others we're starting to see more and more breeds come out with some reproduction EPDs. Now, I told you that these traits are lowly heritable. And so the progress isn't going to be extremely rapid for these traits, but because of the economic value of reproduction, they still should be a consideration when you're looking at a bull's EPDs. The ones that probably have the more emphasis, or maybe these at the end, these are lifetime productivity, traits like stayability and sustained cow fertility. Excuse me. The other one that I like, and I think Gelby's the only one that has it right now, is this 30-month pregnancy EPD. And so that's really telling us how good a bull's daughters are at getting pregnant after they have had their first calf. So it's that rebreed rate that I think is going to be important. Heifer pregnancy, usually I think Dr. Anderson will tell you if you treat them right, and you get the right nutrition and develop heifers right, we're going to get a high percentage of them pregnant anyway. So it doesn't have as big a weighting in my opinion. If you have a means of getting paid for carcass traits, we certainly have EPDs that can help you out there. And remember, marbling gets a lot of attention, but the trait that probably drives carcass value more than anything is actually carcass weight at this time. But you have to be careful there. Once again, that trait is highly correlated with mature size. So if you buy a bull that's got an extremely high carcass weight EPD, and you keep back his daughters, they're likely to be very big mature cows if you keep them back in the herd. So just be aware of that relationship. Some other traits that we're looking at are things like disposition. This is a trait that we now have EPDs for. The docility EPD most breeds give us. Higher values means that bull's offspring should have the genetics for more docility. But you also need to take a visual look at that bull and make sure that he's not crazy, that he was treated correctly, because even though he has good genetics for docility, if he wasn't treated correctly, he could still be a handful. And so you need to make sure that you still take care of that from a visual standpoint and an EPD standpoint. Scrotal circumference is the exception that I was talking to you guys about earlier, that this is one trait where if you're a commercial cattleman, the actual measurement is what you pay attention to instead of the EPD, okay? So if you're a seed stock producer, the scrotal circumference EPD is what you do, because higher values means those bulls that you're selling to commercial guys are going to have larger scrotal circumferences, which is what we want. But for the commercial guy, since you're going to be castrating that bull's calves, his scrotal circumference EPD is of little value. But you do want a bull that has a large actual measurement, because that's going to tell you about the carrying capacity and the breeding capacity of that bull. And so the one exception, like I say, using EPDs is the commercial cattleman for scrotal circumference use the actual measurement. Some other traits of importance, things like color and the horn pole, whether or not you're going to get, whether the bull is a carrier of the horn gene or the red allele. Look for the term homozygous. If he's homozygous black, that means that he shouldn't throw any red calves, that he has both alleles for the black, both black alleles, and shouldn't throw any calves because black is dominant to red. The same thing with horned polled. If he is homozygous polled, you shouldn't have any horned calves. Now you can still get scurred calves, so that's a misconception to think that a homozygous polled bull will not give you scurred calves, because you can still get scurs out of that bull. Be careful of terms like double bred. It just means that both parents were black or both parents were polled. It does not mean that the bull is homozygous. And the other term to be familiar with is carrier. If you see the word carrier, then you know he has either the red allele or the horn allele. All right, so now on the situation that we're in today. So what are some thoughts? I've put some thought into thinking how you guys, that if you haven't bought your bull yet, some points to maybe help you out. You know, I used to say reputation used to play a much bigger role in bull buying. Back when we were using ratios and didn't have EPDs, it was very important to know the reputation of a bull breeder, because you know, the ratios, you know that half the bulls on the place are going to ratio over 100, whether it's a good place or not. Uh, and so with EPDs, it took some away from that. We could have a lot more reliability on that value. But I think that in today's times, those of you that have established good relationships with your seed stock providers, I think it's going to pay dividends. So first of all, contact that person and kind of find out what options are available, how their operation is working these days, and what their plans are. There's a lot of sales that are still coming up, and I really don't know what some of these folks are going to do. If they still hold the sale, if you're comfortable with it and can maintain social distancing there, then take advantage of it. But you may think for this year, maybe think about buying sight unseen or something like that. As we would always recommend to you, whether you are old-fashioned way or however, I always try and insist that you guys get the production information in advance, and hopefully that's in the form of these EPDs and or indexes. So have that before you ever see the bull, whether you're driving to see him in person, whether you're looking at him on a video, however you're doing it, make your first decisions based on the production information and primarily those EPDs. Once you've made that cut, don't even worry about trying to look at the bulls that don't make the cut, because you might see them and they might look fantastic and you talk yourself into it and it might not be the right bull for you. So once you've made that initial cut, then go and look at the bulls that made that cut. See if you can get some videos. I think that your seed stock guys are probably in a much more opportunity to try and get into some of these avenues of trying to market their bulls. And it's so simple these days. I mean, every phone is a video recorder. And so should be very easy to get some good videos and do as much as you can. Some things that you might want to talk about your bull provider about is making sure that you have some assurances that if that bull's structure or his temperament is not as described when you get him on your farm, that you do have some recourse, that you have some opportunity to work with him to make a swap out or something like that. And it could be good intentions sometimes that things go wrong, but I know that most of you are going to be uncomfortable in a distance relationship and trying to make a bull purchase. So try and work with the seed stock provider and see if you can get some of those assurances. And I can promise you, open communication from the beginning is going to be the solution to this whole problem. And so communicate is my advice on this. So in summary, for you guys, I want you to utilize crossbreeding. It's going to increase the overall productivity of your herd, and I can say that with extreme confidence. Select bulls based on their performance information. That's their EPDs, but also visually appraisal. Even in this time, we still need to either have confidence that our seed stock provider is going to do a proper visual appraisal of them, or get some videos, still pictures, and things like that to take a look at them. work with reputable seed stock providers, somebody that you know and trust and can work with, and establish how you're going to work this whole thing, even as far as the transportation of the bull and how that's going to all work out. Get all of that set up in advance so that there's no uncomfortable situations or no one gets sick from this whole thing. Make sure you have a plan, and try and remain as flexible as possible, but stay safe during this process. It's not worth getting sick over. All right, this is kind of the last thing, and then we'll open it up for questions and all. And I don't want anybody to run off, because we do have a little survey that Jeff's going to have for you at the very end that we would like for you guys to take as well, if you would please. But we did talk with the GOAP, and I sent out an email to the agents, and the process that we're going to try and do to help you guys get credit for the CAPE education requirement is that there's a code that we want you to put in that beside the presenter or event representative signature. And you can see over here to the right, this is the area that you would put that code. So you would fill it out the same as you always have. You can put something, you don't have to put the long title, just beef webinar bull selection, or next week it would be beef webinar repro or whatever. For this week, if you want to claim this one, then the code is this ROWLI, reaching out while.
Oh, sorry, I lost you there. It's reaching out while locked in, and this is session number 1.
I heard you cough, Jeff, but you didn't cough loud enough, I guess, to interact it. You got me back?
You're back.
Okay. So the code for this week would be ROW, so reaching out while locked in, so ROWLI-1. And just for the title, you can put UK and then today's date, 4/7/20. Now, you need to also send an email to your A&R agent and ask him to send you a verification email, because whether or not an educational program counts for CAPE is the decision. The county extension agent is who makes that call. So they can send you a letter saying that they confirm that this event does count. And if you don't have this form, they should be able to send you that form as well. And then you can fill out the form, staple it, that verification from the agent, and that's what you can send in with your paperwork. So hopefully that clarifies everything and enables you guys to get some credit for this. And with that, Dr. Limcooler, I'm going to open it up for questions and turn it back over to you and let you tell them any marching orders that you have for them.
Sounds good. So at this time, if you have questions, you can type those in the chat, or you can unmute and simply ask those questions to Dr. Bullock. So Darrh, there's a question from Sarah Fannin, who's the county agent in Morgan County. Lots of offices and association host BSEs where bulls are brought in and the vets are there to do breeding soundness exams at one location to try and offset some of the costs. Any thoughts on how to conduct those this year? You know, we're just getting kind of in that time point of where bulls are going to start coming in and get those breeding soundness exams. So thoughts on that? Stage it from a time standpoint, or what's your thoughts?
Right. That's a very, very excellent point, Sarah. And I know that Dr. Anderson's giving you double thumbs up now, but because it is important. This is one of the most critical things that we do every year with our herd. I mean, selection is great and having great genetics is great, but if that bull's infertile, he's doing us no good. Sarah, once again, I think that particularly these community events like that, we need to use extreme precaution. I think I would recommend having a very strict schedule, working with the vet, and maybe having it to where you have particular time slots open. And I know it's not going to be perfect, but you know, instruct people that they're not to get out of their vehicle. They pull up and get the bull tested loaded back up and keep as much distance as possible during that process. And once again, I think you're going to have to absolutely insist that no one gets out of their vehicle except when their bulls are being checked, and use as many precautions as possible, because we definitely, I'm not willing, and I'll let Dr. Anderson chime in, I'm not willing to say let's give that a pass this year, because from a financial standpoint, that's one of the more important things that the producers can be doing. Les, any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, we cannot give it a pass. I mean, it's good. This economy is going to be tough enough. We can't take, a 10% preg rate because we turned out an infertile bull. Set a strict schedule. The only time the farmer needs to get out of the truck is to unload the bull, get back in the truck. The vets will put him in the chute, collect the semen, take him back out, load him back up, and go. And whatever the vet says, one person every 30 minutes, something like that. And you can have a monitor out in the parking lot that makes sure people don't get out. But we cannot give up on this one. Of all the things that we do, this is the most important reproductive management tool we have, and we can't pass that up.
And each veterinarian may have their own crew that will unload your bulls and load your bulls that you may not even have to get out.
Yeah, but that's a great question to start us off with.
Great question. That's all I got.
Okay.
Another question, Dr. Bullock, on your thoughts on genomic testing your cow herd, and you might want to mention the requirement for seed stock producers coming up.
Excellent point. Here's my viewpoint on the genomics testing. If you're in the seed stock industry today, I highly recommend that you do genomics testing because of the increased accuracy that you're getting on your bulls that you're able to sell to your commercial producers. I've had people say, well, do you do it on the bulls or the cows? You need to be doing it on the bulls that you're selling, but for your own benefit, if you're a seed stock guy, doing it on your cows provides you with a wealth of information. It could drastically change what that cow's EPDs are, and to a more true value for you to make your decisions based on. Now, if we're talking about the commercial genomics testing, I'm less positive right now. Now, I'm going to reserve the right to be wrong here, but I don't think that we're quite to the point that those tests have the right economic return. Do they work? Absolutely. If you do genomics, these commercial tests on your females, it's going to help you to decide which are the better ones and not. Now, are you going to be able to recruit the amount of money that you spend on those tests? I think that that's still in the fuzzy area of we don't know yet. And we're doing some follow-up on that. We've got some part of some of the Applied Master Cattleman money is going to help us try and get a little bit better information on that as well.
Dr. Bullock, another question came in about if you're going to source a bull from the stockyards, are EPDs available when you buy those? In other states, you don't hear much about those EPDs being available, but we do have some herd dispersals and some of that occur at some of our stockyards. And
right.
So when there's a herd dispersal versus just going to a regular sale, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in most cases, buying a bull out of the stockyards would not be highly recommended at all, and in most cases, highly discouraged. Now, if you have a bull that comes through and it is somebody's used him for a season or two, and he's still in good shape and has had all the proper health taken care of and everything else, and the EPDs are available. I can't say that that there would be, you know, anything from a genetic standpoint wrong with that. Now, health, I'll let you talk to your vet about what you want to do there. But from a genetic standpoint, I don't have a problem with that, okay? But in very rare cases, are you actually going to have the opportunity to get EPDs on a bull that goes to the stockyard?